Hello, and welcome to another edition of History After Hours. My name is Kevin Pumphrey, and with me, as usual, is Mr. Ron Franklin and Mr. Jeremy Nixon. We are recording this on Wednesday, January 27th, 2021. We are three history teachers at Lakeside High School in Hot Springs, Arkansas, and we try to analyze current events using our knowledge of the past. In this episode, we will discuss Biden's inauguration. We will look at the second impeachment of Donald Trump and the possible future of the Republican Party. And we will also spend some time discussing a new bill in Arkansas that, if passed, might limit teachers' ability to talk about and teach controversial subjects. So, with all that being said, we hope you enjoy the podcast. All right, it is Wednesday, January 27th, 2021. We hope everyone is doing well under these extreme circumstances.
How many weeks ago was the riot now? 3? At the Capitol? 3 weeks ago?
Yeah,
today?
6th. So, yeah.
So this is the 3-week anniversary of that.
Wow.
Yeah, and that's kind of what we discussed on the last podcast. So we haven't talked since then.
It's the week anniversary of the inauguration.
Yeah, it is, isn't it?
So
Yeah.
we'll start there. What do y'all think about the inauguration? Did it seem like a return to some sense of normalcy, or what was the reactions?
Yeah, I mean, I felt it was a return to normalcy in some ways, as much as it could be in the middle of a pandemic. But we ended up having a fairly normal transfer of power, even after all the insurrection. And so, and it wasn't the normal inaugural celebrations and things like that, but it definitely felt transfer of power. And then there were a lot of executive orders issued and some confirmations that happened pretty quickly. So I don't know that it's exactly normal per se, but it felt much more routine. So
I was just happy that his inaugural speech was a pivot from American carnage. I remember 4 years ago listening to Trump give his speech and really just kind of sitting there with my mouth open, like, what am I hearing? Because it was so dark, it was so dismal, and America's a wasteland, and I was just like, is it though? I mean, and I knew that was part of his appeal to some people. It's like, you lay out it's bad, and I'm the savior, and I knew that's where he was going with that. But to hear it on that platform, broadcast out to the world in that moment, which is supposed to be about, it's almost like if he had given a State of the Union address and was like, yeah, we're really screwed. I mean, that's how it kind of felt. It's like it was almost, to me, a mockery of what an inauguration speech was supposed to be. So when I go back now and hear the Biden speech in comparison to the Trump speech, I'm like, it felt, whether you like Biden or you like Trump, that doesn't matter to me one bit or the other. But the tone of the speech and the idea about unifying the country and whether he can accomplish that or not, that's a different conversation. But just the way that you begin with this is your launching pad, really, is this new moment. You've just taken the oath and now you do your thing. And you set the stage for, what is to come. And I just remember being really almost like this feeling of despair after Trump gave his speech. Even though I know that we were better than what he was talking about, it felt weird to hear him say those hardcore dramatic things. But so Biden didn't, and I was much more appreciative of what he had to say.
When you talk about the Trump inaugural address, the whole branding of the Trump campaign, which was genius, by the way, the hats and the Make America Great branding, MAGA, all of that was really smart in a lot of ways. But one thing about that phrase, Make America Great Again, immediately it becomes divisive, because if that is a correct statement, then at some point in our past, we must have been great. But were we for everybody? Is there a point in our history where you can, we were great at this point? Were we great for everybody? And, so it's a divisive campaign. Biden, of course, being all about unity, is the opposite of that. It's not as devices, he said unity about 1 million times. I think we knew the point. And look, you can say that inaugural addresses are not important, and in some ways that's correct. The actions speak louder than words. But teaching American history, I spend a lot of time on inaugural addresses and farewell addresses because it does give you a sense of the country. I mean, Joe Biden and his speechwriters, prepare for weeks and weeks and weeks to try to set a tone and to say exactly, kind of sum up what they really feel. And of course, obviously, he wants to appeal to a lot of people, and he does want to bring people together. But I think it does matter. I think words matter. I think tone matters. I think etiquette matters. And it was nice to have that matter again. So, yeah, once again, it was a weird situation with COVID. But to hear Chris Wallace from Fox News say it was the best inaugural address he's ever heard, that was shocking to me.
You know what's interesting, since you brought up the Make America Great Again slogan, he's not the first one to use that. The first one I can remember actually seeing was Reagan and Bush, and they're like, Make America Great. And so, or again, I mean, but that almost in a weird way makes more sense for them than it did for Trump, because the way they were using it was the 70s, there was a lot of turmoil. There's a lot of, the economic downturn and the stagnation that we saw and the rising prices and yet, high interest rates. I remember, I want to say that, interest rates on a new house, or even not even a new house, but a house, were like 12 to 15%. But wages were still really low and sinking, lots of unemployment, the oil embargoes. Mm-hmm. I'm old enough to remember when there were gas lines here in Hot Springs and signs in windows like, sorry, no more gas. Hopefully we'll have some tomorrow. And people, or waiting in line and running out of gas before they could get to the pumps. So, and you're still trying to get out from underneath the Nixon's resignation, and we're still reeling from Vietnam, and then all of So there's so much heaviness in those parts of the 70s. There's still racial tensions. There's LGBTQ tensions. We talk about the police in New York hammering down on the gay community there in places like Greenwich Village. And so and then to come out and apparently the Iranian hostage situation that really just put the final nail in the coffin for Carter, if it hadn't already been there anyway. But so Reagan comes along with this spirit of let's go back to, I think he was hearkening back to those earlier days after World War II, and we felt good, and it was that vibe of where we can still be on top again, and we are the leaders of the free world. And I think he harnessed that. And so when he says "Make America Great Again," it has a different feel than the way Trump was using it to me.
Yeah, I mean, the context matters, right? So Reagan, I think, had more of a political, have faith in our government again. Let's get our stock market and economy roaring again. Trump, when you think about his major things, was building a wall, the Muslim ban, repeal and replace Obamacare, and then he goes "Make America Great Again." It wasn't necessarily political or economic. It was different.
Yeah,
it was just different.
But yes, the Reagan's use of that word, or the Reagan campaign's use of that word, seemed more inclusive. Whether it played out that way or not, but it seemed that way, because we could still argue, some of their faults that they had in some of the social issues, and we talk about the AIDS crisis and whatever. But besides that point, when he initially said that out, it seemed more inclusive, whereas Trump's use of it seemed very exclusive. Make America Great Again for people who want division, who want separation, who want isolationism, who want to get away from our global community and our global allies.
Down the escalator. Huh? That started the moment he came down the escalator.
Down the escalator is, now that I look back on it, that's a very symbolic moment, going down the escalator. He didn't
down the rabbit hole.
You were going down into
the... and I mean, those statements that came next were about Mexico.
Yeah.
So, I mean, when you roll out that "Make America Great Again" slogan after that sort of context, like you were saying, it does feel dramatically different in meaning. So unity,
once again. Now we're let's stay just for a second. Obviously, the Trumpism and the Trump movement and the faith that people have in him is not going away. We've talked about that before, but let's talk momentarily about impeachment. Today, I heard that, I guess it was yesterday, Rand Paul made a motion to basically declare this impeachment unconstitutional because Trump is no longer in office. And a lot of Republicans, including Mitch McConnell, voted for that, which shows me that this impeachment thing is got a dead end coming.
Weren't there like 20-something senators that, or was it 20, or was it 45? Was it 45 that voted?
Yeah, it was a 55-45 vote.
Okay.
So you had the 50 Democrats and 5 Republicans saying that it was a constitutional procedure. And it absolutely is. There's not even really much debate in serious legal community that it's not. And the reason there's not a debate about whether it's constitutional or unconstitutional is, we have something that presumes that when you have something in a written law or a constitution, that it has an outcome and a meaning. And so when you say the Senate has the constitutional authority to not only remove but prohibit someone from holding office again, that provision would be meaningless if you couldn't apply it to a past president. Because that would give the president essentially in their last days the ability to do anything they wanted without repercussion. So yeah, it's not even a serious debate that this is constitutional.
And even though they have never impeached and removed a president after the fact, after his presidency has ended, they have impeached and blocked people who have already left office
from serving.
Yeah. So it's not like it has not happened. It just hasn't happened for the office of the presidency.
Right.
So it seemed like there was a glimmer of hope for Democrats who want this impeachment to occur and to block him from Republicans like McConnell, who had secretly been saying maybe they could support this. But now in the light of that vote yesterday, it seemed like maybe not. How does this play out? How do you think this impeachment plays out, and how does it affect? Is it a waste of time?
What do you think has changed, though? Because so many right after the insurrection, so many were, we denounced this, and they were saying directly that it was at Trump's insistence that they do these things and that he misled them through the years worth of misinformation and really dramatically after the election or during and after the election. So at what point was it because he threatened a new political party and they're like, oh my God, he'll split the base away from us, and now they're like, we better get in line with him or he'll do this and we'll be in trouble? Is that the reasoning?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard for me to really say at this point. Because look, if they wanted to, I think they could reclaim the GOP with him not running again. But the threat of a third party is dangerous
because
politically
it splits
speaking.
The party.
Yeah. So I probably do think it's probably party over country again.
What if he does it anyway?
Well, that's always a concern that they need to take into account, and I don't know that they have. Trump is, that it was gearing up before the Capitol unrest or whatever we're going to call it. It was already sort of a foregone conclusion that after Joe Biden was sworn in, that he would immediately announce for 2024 that the apparatus would keep moving, and the only thing that really changed was the attack at the Capitol. And so I don't know if they were waiting to see how the political chess was going to play out, how much of an impact that it was going to have. I don't know if they were waiting on polling, but something has shifted that dynamic. And
I think him not being on Twitter,
I think that's
is a big deal where people are moving past this quickly. If Trump was still on Twitter saying it was stolen, it was rigged, you might see the impeachment have a little more success because he's still saying and inflaming situations. But because he's banned from a lot of the social media, I think people are more willing to, well, it's not as bad as we thought. And people like Matt Gaetz and Jim Jordan, they're riding high right now. I mean, they're really popular. And people like Liz Cheney are probably going to get primaried out, So it's like Trumpism is still so potent that if you turn on him, you lose your job.
Out of sight, out of mind too. They don't have to see it or hear it on social media. The Matt Gaetz thing is funny because he was the one who a year or so ago said that it is absolutely constitutional to impeach a former president.
Yeah,
I love that.
Yeah.
So statement coming back to bite you in the butt.
Did anybody bring that up to him?
Oh, I'm sure they did.
I mean,
he wouldn't respond
officially.
Yeah. That I don't know. I'm sure someone's asked him about it.
In the hearings, I wonder if things like that will come up. Here's what you said before. I mean, I don't know. It could count as some sort of ability. I'm sure he'll just ignore it. That's one of the weird things about being a politician at that level. You can just ignore what you want to ignore a lot of times. Like, I'm not going to respond to that, which I don't see how they get to that position where they didn't have to answer questions? I'm not going to answer that, but I will say this. Well, don't you have an obligation to answer our questions directly?
Yeah, well, that's the spin a lot of politicians are very, very good at. I do want to mention, about a year ago when we were having Democratic debates and we were looking, can the Democratic Party keep from splitting between the liberal factions and the moderates and all that? Now, with the election of Biden, you see the Democrats trying to unify and somewhat moderate, but somewhat, liberal, trying to get these checks passed and things that they really could do quickly that would be very popular. And we can talk about why they're dragging their feet on that and whether they should really spend a lot of time trying to compromise with the Republicans. But beyond that, the future of the GOP, Sarah Sanders, former Sarah Huckabee, has now, at this point in history, has, I guess, filed that she wants to run as governor of Arkansas.
She announced. I'm not sure that she's filed. Did she do both?
I don't know that she's filed. I know she announced, but
yeah.
I assume she's going to file. And then, so she is a Trumper. I mean, obviously being the spokesperson for.
He's already come out and congratulated her and put his weight behind her. Yeah, so the endorsement is already there.
I mean, I think she'll win.
I do too.
Just by running. So this kind of the future of the GOP, the deficit hawks, the Reaganites, the people that were always concerned about those top things. That wanted to kind of ignore some social issues. Those old school Reaganites, is it a thing of the past? Is it Trumpism from here on out? Is there a split in the Republican Party? Is there any way to bring those coalitions together, or do we have to choose one? I mean, if you're McConnell, you got to probably think he does not like having the Trump faction in his party, but at the same time, it's such a potent thing, he has to go with it to a degree.
If you're waiting on any of them to make a brave decision, I think you're going to be sadly mistaken or we're going to be waiting a long time. We're just going to sit there and I don't think it's going to happen.
They're just retiring instead.
Yeah.
I mean, if you look at the policies that Trump was able to get done, tax cuts, and it kind of seems somewhat normal I'm talking about through Congress, of course, not executive orders necessarily. So, and if Republicans got a lot of what they wanted, but it's kind of hard to predict what the Republican Party will look like in 2 years or a year and a half, whatever, when we have midterm elections coming back around, how these people will be campaigning. Because, just like the impeachment vote, they're putting their stamp on that. That's a tough vote for a lot of Republicans because if you vote to impeach, that could come right back up in the campaign in a year and destroy you. So I don't know. I think we're in a weird time for the GOP, as it were, and I'm not sure what the future is. But
in 2 years, when we have midterm elections, the Democrats could lose the House and the Senate both pretty easily.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, they have 3.
So if they're going to accomplish anything.
It's got to be now, and that's a historical trend anyway. That the party who holds the presidency loses seats in the midterm the following, and the Democrats don't have them to lose. Literally, they have 3 in the House and 0 in the Senate. And the Senate's always a more favorable map. More densely populated blue states are outnumbered by less populated red states, so the Senate's probably going to flip back to red. The House is always, I would say it's more of a coin toss, but I think they'll lose it too. So yeah, whatever they do, they've got 2 years, and that's kind of the pattern we've seen. Obama had 2 years, Trump had 2 years. I think Biden's got 2 years.
If I'm a Republican candidate, let's say like Tom Cotton, who has his eye on the presidency in 2024, which it appears that he might, I wonder if the strategy is that the Trumpism, now that it is sort of like you said, out of sight, out of mind, do you sort of just let that fade off a little bit and then bring back your own brand of that so that you still connect with the base and then they go, oh yeah, this is, here's my boy, I'm gonna vote for him. Maybe not as Trumpy as Trump. I'm not sure anybody can be. Like, he's the master of being that guy. You know what I mean? He owns that persona. But I wonder if you count on the people who might have voted against you because of Trump, because again, we think about the states, Georgia that went blue, Arizona went blue. You get the battleground states back to blue at least for the presidential election. But I wonder if you let the fervor that surrounds this moment and the angst and the anger that goes along with the insurrection, if you just let that sort of simmer and go away, let time kind of soothe that and let it kind of fade into the distance, and then you can use your own brand and bring that back, and then people who might have voted against you in the immediate aftermath of that have now gone, well,
Yeah.
I wonder if that's the strategy, that you don't abandon it, you just sort of let it kind of simmer a little bit, and then you bring it back when you're ready.
Well, doesn't that depend on Trump, really? Because can Trumpism survive without Trump? If he's, let's say in the next 2 or 3 months, he's impeached, or let's say in the 2 and 3 months, he goes to jail for some reasons or whatever, and he's out of the picture. Okay, let's just imagine a world where Trump is out of the picture from running again. Doesn't that change the game quite a bit?
I don't know, man.
I don't think so. Weirdly, I don't. And there are a couple of reasons why I don't think so. He's established what they're calling the office of the former president, and they're still I shouldn't laugh. They are releasing statements that are still what they're calling official statements of the former president. And that doesn't feel like someone who's going away. It doesn't feel like it's an organization that's going away. I think it's going to be a familial thing. If it's not him, I think it's setting up to be, I think it's Ivanka and then possibly, Junior. But with that kind of setup and they're keeping a lot of the staff on, I don't think he fades away even if he goes to prison.
Okay. Well, in light of that, let me ask you another question. We have to move this country forward. We're going to hang on to the hopes that we're going to stay democratic and that our republic will survive. In order for that to occur, the Democrats that are in charge, as of now, at least for the next 2 years, and the people that were, literally cult of personality with Trump that believed that was the only person telling the truth. There's got to be a bridge at some point. You've got to figure out a way. Well, Joe Biden called it unity. What is the path forward in order to move this country forward without? Because what can we do? Is there anything we can do to keep the divide between these factions from getting wider and wider? What would you think? Is there any practical things that maybe the government or the press, new laws? I don't
know. I think it's an uphill battle because you're not going to convince the people that I know that are hardcore Trump believers. You're not going to convince them that they're wrong. I just don't see how you're going to do that. And I think they're going to continue to hang on to it was stolen. I think they're going to continue that narrative. He's the only one that can save America from the evil liberals who are going to give the country away to China or whomever. The evil globalists, the ones who are going to ship our jobs overseas, the ones who are going to allow immigration to flood the country and then cheapen the labor to the point where the working man can't survive. I've already heard the rhetoric. I have already heard people saying those exact things. I'm not making those things up. I'm repeating what I've already heard people say. And I don't think that I don't know that you stamp that out. I don't know how you can. Even through an educational process, because I think they're gonna resist even a moderate attempt to go, look, we're not against you, we're trying to help you. Look, here's how we can do. I don't know what you could do to convince them to stop being angry. I don't know what you can do to convince them to stop being. There was a guy that they interviewed, and I don't know who he was, but he was one of those QAnon followers. He believed that the storm was coming and that they were going to that insurrection at the Capitol, they were going to actually hang the culprits and take back America. And so they were talking to a guy after he didn't believe that the inauguration was going to happen, right? That it was going to be stopped and that Trump would remain president and all that. And so when that didn't happen, he was very disillusioned. And he's like, and they were interviewing him. They're like, well, what do you think now? And he's like, well, I guess I was duped. And they go, well, if you admit that you were wrong about that, can you admit that you were possibly wrong about the whole stolen election thing? And he's like, oh no. And not even a hesitation, not even a moment of thought, just nope. And it's been drilled in. And I don't know how you reverse that misinformation over even years, maybe. I don't know. Well, unless you can somehow prove that.
That's what I was about to say.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Well, we were talking about this in Comparative today, ironically. The idea that once that legitimacy has been established through whatever means, whether it's coercion, whether it's propaganda, whether it's built in through socialization through generations, that mindset is so difficult to reverse that you almost have to have something
because it's fear-based.
It is that, yeah. It's and that's what we're talking about, the coercive nature of it. And how do you undo that? I don't know that you can, unless you can have proof that it wasn't, or which I think there is proof that it wasn't rigged. But of course, we went the route of reject the evidence of your eyes and ears. Sort of 1984 route there. I don't know how you combat that, because and we see it going on now, and I know we're going to talk about this later, but it's the idea of shutting down avenues of conversation and shutting down paths of discourse and civil discourse instead of opening them up and trying to reach people. I don't know how we do it at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, I think the way forward is a shared reality that both sides have to agree on certain facts in order to move forward. And look, on both sides, there are levels. Yes. There are people on the left that vehemently hate Trump and all his supporters, and no matter what. And of course, that's not a correct viewpoint, just like people on the right who believe everything, Trump is the only one in the universe speaking truth, and they will follow him to the grave. There are levels, right? So not every person that invaded the Capitol, not every Trump supporter feels that way. There's levels to coercion.
But moderates tend to be so soft-spoken
that's
that
true.
It's going to be hard to get anybody's attention.
So how do you get a shared reality? How can you make people that maybe, look, there's going to be that certain segment that there's nothing you can do, but is there anything, like the press has been smeared. What's interesting is Trump was one of the first to really coin the phrase fake news. Obviously, fake news has existed forever, and spin and all that stuff. And there's different incentives for that. But they actually kind of became what he promoted. I mean, you saw news outlets that were centrist, but maybe slightly left, go more left and more anti-Trump. And then you saw conservative outlets go way more Trumpy. They became more fake news. And that's where, you ask somebody, well, where do you get your news from? I listen to Facebook, I watch a little bit on there and Fox News, or I go MSNBC and CNN, that's pretty much it. Or, it's like, and they have this cognitive bias. I don't know a way forward. And, of course, now we have social media companies dictating certain things that are true and false. And, it's sometimes refreshing to see that when I agree with it. But then I also wonder what's next. Where does that lead? And maybe this is a good time to talk about the House bill that was introduced in Arkansas. So, Nixon, you've kind of, or both of y'all have had I guess you were the first one to really get your attention, and you told me about it. So can you explain just kind of how you came across it, and then what it means?
Interestingly, I came across it because Ms. Smith, one of our Spanish teachers, sent it to me and said, how do you think this is going to affect our native curriculum, the native Spanish classes?
Yeah, explain what it is for people.
So we're talking about House Bill, what is it, 1812, I think it is?
1218.
1218, there we go. Thanks. That basically, I'm trying to think of a good way to summarize it, and y'all can jump in. It talks about prohibiting curriculum that, what are the words? I've forgotten now. That
I guess we should have printed out this before we came in here.
Yeah, that would be probably helpful. Encourages division, right?
That promotes division.
Promotes division about a certain group of people, race, gender,
class.
Basically, it was about minorities trying to come together, perhaps in a coalition, and this being really kind of against that because it was somehow anti-American. That was the gist of it, the way that it reads through. The words themselves aren't necessarily specifically threatening, but at the same time, if you read the whole thing in its context, the way it's couched, the way the language is phrased, you can see that it would be discriminatory against minority groups across multiple levels. And it does say very specifically in there that we would lose funding if we taught something like, and I'm going to quote the thing, I'm going to quote the bill, social justice. Like we could not teach about that. We couldn't teach about that because it might be deemed as being a promotion of that, which would encourage divisions amongst Americans because minority groups who might feel oppressed might feel even more so, and then they rally together, and then next thing you know, we lose the country. And again, I really paraphrased that a lot.
So before Nixon reads this, I just want to tell everybody, if you're listening, the intent of the bill is different than what the bill says. If you read the wording of it really does seem at first glance that this is promoting equality and that we shouldn't let any group feel ashamed or bad or anything. But then when you think it through about it in context with what's going on in the world, you know what the intent of this bill is. So just keep that in mind as you hear it, and then we can break it down.
Here we go. House Bill 1218, and I'm going to read the B portion, the relevant portion. A public school shall not include in its program of instruction a course, class, event, or activity that, and this is B2, promotes division between, resentment of, or social justice for race, gender, political affiliation, social class, or a particular class of people, advocates the solidarity of or the isolation of a group of students instead of treatment of students as individuals based on a particular characteristic, including without limitation ethnicity, race, religion, gender, and social class.
So it sounds like we want to treat everyone and we want to make sure everyone is equal. We should not make differences based on race. We shouldn't accentuate differences.
You read between the lines, though. This is like, hey, minority people of whatever classification you might include yourself in, you are a danger to society because you might band together and then feel oppressed and then do something radical. Is that? Am I misreading that? Am I misinterpreting that?
No, you're not misreading that. And no, it's ridiculous to say that we are, because the subtitle's to prohibit offering of certain courses. It is content-based restriction, and it's blatant content-based restriction. It's saying that you can't peaceably assemble in these groups together. Like-minded. You know what they did? They did that to the NAACP as well in the 1950s. And this hiding behind the idea of, well, we're not going to segregate people, that's the bad, that's a lie. What you're doing is you're intentionally creating division by, like you said, prohibiting them from associating and assembling together to talk about ideas that might be for the advancement of things like LGBT rights or Black Lives Matter, clubs, events, organizations.
So if we were to bring up in a history class or a political science class the idea that these clubs that once existed or these groups that wanted to support, let's say that like NAACP or a GSA, a Gay Straight Alliance, a club that wanted to meet here at the school, if we were to say, well, sure, I'll sponsor that, or that might be something that couldn't happen. Or
correct.
If we talked about the fact that here's their history and it might lead some student to feel, well, I feel that threatens me somehow because they're angry at non-minorities, and then I don't know. The whole thing gets very convoluted very quickly.
What about young Republicans or young Democrats? Those couldn't meet?
Nope.
Okay, so I have problems with this on several levels. One is just simply legislation telling us how to teach. And I know that the worry, especially on the right, is that these liberals have taken over the schools and they're teaching our kids crazy stuff. Here's the intent, I believe. And of course, it's not a coincidence that this is passed now with Democratic and presidential control.
Well, yeah, it's a historical reactionary measure that we see when status quo groups feel threatened, that they will, one of the first things they do is threaten intellectual institutions like schools and universities. And this does include universities, by the way.
Yes, it does.
Now, here's because I'm decently conservative on several issues, and the intent, and the thing that I'm concerned about too, is the critical race theory that is being pushed by the left, that had been quashed kind of by the right in recent times, but might be brought back up. The mandatory diversity training that's going on in certain areas. As a person who wants to move beyond race and beyond division, Sometimes I think these can be more destructive when you start to see race everywhere, when you start to see divisiveness everywhere, even in places it doesn't exist. So I understand some of the concern and the reason that you might want to, make sure that this is not occurring on a scale that's really causing, once again, you can't look at everything as racist. And that's such a toxic word now. And like I make this comparison just real quickly, once again, putting my conservative hat on, but not the MAGA hat, just a conservative, is if you say, there's a small, I think I was talking to one of you, a small portion of our population that would be admittedly KKK or we need, white supremacy as we know it, the capital R racist. And that is repulsive to hear someone talk like that. That is disgusting, and it's disgusting because of our history. Now, let's move to the other side. It is much more socially acceptable to make a statement like, I don't want any more white men being elected to office. Now, that is also racist with a capital R, and even sexist if you put the man in there. Or I don't want white people doing this or that. That's also racist, but it's not as repulsive. And to me, there's levels to this. Once again, I think all identity politics is pretty much bad, but white identity politics is like the worst of it. So what I think is we're making too many generalizations, and this law is a perfect example of taking any of my power away as a teacher to make these decisions in class. We have to trust our teachers. Or to have a conversation
about what you just said. Like, we couldn't even do that. We couldn't even debate that out. That would be part of the point. So you would have your particular point of view, and you might even bring that up as part of a way to push kids to have a harder conversation, or I shouldn't say a harder conversation because conversations happen, but one that might be a sensitive conversation.
Yeah.
But we would be refrained from and maybe even punished for bringing something like that up so that you could have a debate, because the whole idea about learning from each other is having a spirited debate. And so let's say you had a kid who thought oppositely of you and you bring that up, or maybe there's several kids in the class and you want to be able to draw that out. Let's have a conversation about that so we can come to a clearer understanding. Like, the extreme ideas aren't necessarily problematic unless you let them entrench themselves without having that sort of moderated debate to come to some realization that, this is bad and we could do better than that.
Well, are you not going to teach them about the extreme theories? That's just as dangerous. I think that's, because the response to that response is just ludicrous, that we're just going to shut down perspectives because they may be hard or they may be difficult.
Perfect.
Because, the answer to that, if like you were saying, if you had a liberal kid who pushed back and they said, well, I think there's a difference between racism and prejudice.
Let me clarify. I wasn't saying that he would be trying to teach them to think the way he did.
No, I know you're not.
I just want to make sure people understand that if you brought that up as a point of view so that it could be part of a debate.
Right.
But under this bill,
you couldn't do it. Yeah. Well, and so, the flip side of that is, there's a difference between racism and prejudice. Historically, minorities don't have the power, the autonomy within a political system to implement their will. So it's not exactly racism, but it is prejudice. But that debate is a legitimate debate to have that you can't have because of this bill.
Exactly. And I think, like you're saying, the answer to bad ideas is good ideas. The answer is not to stifle. The answer to these complicated issues is not to shut them down. It's to talk about them. It's to work them out. It's to trust teachers that they can hold two opposing views in their head at the same time. These are complicated issues. They're not black and white. They literally are gray. And it's to show students the gray and let them work it out and let them use their belief system, their history, teach them about the history, and then they can make these decisions for themselves. But to shut it down and say we're just not even going to deal with it it's the worst way to approach it.
It is the absolute worst, and it's censorship of the students in multiple ways: their right to assemble, their right to have an education, their right to speak, and it creates our inability to have critical thinking in the classroom. We can't have debate. We can't have dialogue. And like you said, we couldn't even sponsor these clubs if we wanted to encourage the debate and the dialogue. So it's ironic to me that they have bemoaned censorship and their response is literal censorship, and how we cannot see the hypocrisy of that. And to equate it to segregation is insane. If they had a working knowledge of how the classroom and the school district worked, you would know that we don't and cannot exclude children from clubs.
Yep. Yeah, this is kind of the worst. And also just having Congress telling teachers, look, and you might have teachers in school districts being very horrible, promoting non-facts, promoting divisiveness, get rid of those teachers.
But then deal with those individual people, right?
Right. Administration, that's what they're for. They go to those teachers. They know what's going on in the classrooms, hopefully. They know what students are saying about certain teachers. It is their job to approach those teachers and figure out what's going on. That is the administrative's job, okay?
Well, how can you imagine your class without pro, con, left, right, any debate, really? It's just, here's the one way that you get to think about it because it's pre-approved by the state. And if we teach anything different than that, then they will come down on us and I could lose my job and this school could lose funding until we correct that measure. Are you kidding me? And the sponsors of the bill, whom I've heard back from a couple, and I know you have too, because we emailed them about this. One of the responses was, well, we're only trying to protect children from getting embarrassed when hard conversations are being are taking place in the classroom. And I'm like, all you're doing is creating more and more division, and you don't even understand how we do what we do. You know, it's like you say that you're afraid of Soviet style socialist brainwashing of the children, and yet you stand there and become the thing that you say that you hate by telling me what I can and cannot debate in a classroom.
Isn't that interesting that I actually expected this more from the left, passing legislation to try to tell us what to teach and how to teach.
Like I said, it's
and it's coming now from the right, and it's like, but don't you realize, this is the hypocrisy. I mean, this is what you say that you're worried that the left is doing, and now you're doing it.
It's classic status quo reactionary policy is what it is.
Yeah, and like a lot of school programs and legislation, it is trying to go to the lowest common denominator. The worst teachers are doing this, so let's punish everybody so we don't have to have these tough conversations with individual teachers. And look, I understand that because of unions and whatnot, schools are hamstringed in being able to do with teachers, bad teachers, because it is a hard thing to figure out. We have improvement programs you have to put them on and all that. But I think that still has to be done at the school level because every school's different, the context is different, and to have this legislation, that's
to mandate what we can and can't think about, and what we can and can't talk about, and what we can and can't encourage students to. Even if they're the ones who say, "I'm interested in this, can we talk about that?" I wouldn't even be able to go, "Yeah," and keep my job. So you're quashing curiosity. You're like, what are we doing? We don't want cookie cutter children. We don't want robotic industrialized products. We want free thinkers. We want creative thinkers. We want people who can investigate and who can formulate and make strong argumentations and be persuasive when they. And this is what we want adults to do. We want people to be able to function. And you're thinking about hamstringing. That's exactly what this would do. It's a mental hamstring, is what it is.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to remember what case it was from the Supreme Court, and I want to say it's Tinker, but it may not be. But there are a couple famous quotes from Tinker versus Des Moines, the seminal student speech case. But schools are not enclaves of totalitarianism is one of my favorite quotes, and that is what this feels like. It's the idea that we're going to restrict what you can think, how you can think, and what our teachers have the ability to even say to you. The responses from the legislators that I have heard from, that I don't understand it, or that somehow we don't understand it, is particularly worrisome and offensive to me as an attorney and a teacher both.
Are there any of the people that are sponsoring this bill who have any degree in political science or history, or even a teaching degree, or ever held a licensure, or been in a classroom setting, particularly in our field? Do any of them, to your knowledge,
Recently,
have that experience? Have they been in a classroom beyond when they left whatever their freshman history course in whatever college they went to? Do they have any real experience in dealing with our profession?
Yeah, and we are supposed to push this higher level learning, and you do that through really playing devil's advocate. A student will say something, I'll disagree, and then we'll have a conversation about that. This is, it's burning books, it's censoring. I just don't like any of it.
Part of my strategy is that if any student says something, I don't care if you're left, right, or in the middle. If you say something, I'm going to say the opposite just to see what you do, to push you to think for yourself. Well, why do you think that? Well, let's look at it this way. Have you thought about that way? And let's go. And I can play it either way. I can run it just as far to the right as I want to, or far to the left as I want to, depending on the student that I'm talking to, just to push their buttons, just to encourage them to have a moment of creative thought that maybe they've never had before on that particular subject, because maybe they're in an echo chamber at home or amongst their peers, and they go, well, and so what do you do with that? I'm not trying to get them to think in a particular way, just to think. That's the whole point.
Mm-hmm. And get out of an echo chamber. I think all three of us push ourselves. I mean, look, no matter whatever's in the news, I'm listening to the other team to try to get the perspective on the people that are, supposed to be ashamed of whatever's going on in the news. I want to see how they justify certain things. I think we all push ourselves to try to get a total picture. We don't want a partisan view or a one-way street, and that's what the students deserve. They need to have teachers that push both sides of the issue so we can examine them. And look, take any controversial topic, anything you want to think of that's controversial, it's because it's complicated.
Yes.
And it's because it's multifactual. It's both sides, not multifactual, but multifactional.
Let me give you a real life example of how this can go down a dark path. You ready? I remember a guy in China named Mao Zedong. And one of his policies was in the 1950s, he instituted something called the Great Cultural Learning. And the idea basically was that we're going to prove to the naysayers, the ones who were against his communistic, socialistic stylings, the intellectuals in the country specifically, and the bourgeois some of them had to go into hiding because there was an attempted purge in the earlier days of the socialist movement there. And he says, you know what, we want to prove to you that we are open-minded. You claim that we are totalitarians, that we are against free association and free thought, and we're not like that at all. Matter of fact, we want debate. We want you to challenge us. We want you to come forward and to give us your ideas so we can have a conversation about that. And the only reason that he was willing to say that, in the same breath, he said, because when we have that conversation, we can show you how you're wrong. And then we can change you to the correct style of learning. We can get you to the correct understanding, and then we'll all be happy when you realize that we're right. We are not afraid of debate because we know that we're right and you're wrong. And so we will prove to you that we are right. And that is what this feels like, because what you're attempting to do is purge intellectuals from your midst who will challenge your very conservative way of thinking. And even though you go, well, wait a minute, he was a socialist. I thought he was on the left-hand side. Yeah, well, the status quo element of that becomes very much dictatorial, and his purging of people who thought differently from him, right? Here's the official party line messaging. Here's what you have to think, and here's how you have to believe, and here's how you have to act based on those two things. And if you don't do it, then we will either correct your thinking or we will remove you. That's where this could go if we're not careful.
Yeah, if you want to get teachers fired up, try to tell them what they can and can't teach. Because, right. I mean, this is what our career is. Our career is trying to do our best job of presenting to students facts and both sides of issues.
That was part of my point a while ago about, do any of them have the same experience that we have? All of us are experts in what we do, in our teaching styles and our methods and our strategies, and we have hammered this into something that is, I mean, these are well-oiled machines in the classes that we promote, and the kids that have been in those classes who have engaged with us have told me so. That's not just me just bragging on us. That's from years worth of commentary from students after the fact, because I ask for critiques and I want to know what I can do to be better. And they're like, this is it. So how dare you come to me and say, or to any of us really, just this blanket statement that they know better about how to do this than we do? What makes you an expert? Because somebody put a check mark by a ballot box in your name and then stuffed it into a thing, and now you become an office holder, and now you think that you can come and tell me how to do my job? No. No, and I encourage you to come and talk to me about that.
I do too. Please come have a visit with us, because I guarantee you that I will have a substantive conversation with you about the First Amendment and students' rights and my rights as well, based on my 14 years with a law license.
Well, and speaking of our former students, we had a former student, I won't mention the name, that wrote an article and is now published.
Yes.
Very nice, yes.
That was about this very law. And they're in college now, but it's good to see that our former students are even speaking out in a very intellectual way and a very honest way about things they don't see, correctly. And if we were stifled to not teach that student these things, they wouldn't know to do it. Who knows what we would have ended up with. Okay.
Good news. We resist.
Yeah. I just want to let's end on a happy note. Well, I can't think of any.
Good news. We resist.
Yeah, that is kind of the happy note, isn't it?
Well, honestly, my happy note is that former student, and I'm seeing so many young people engaged with their legislators, with the process, and whatever happens, whatever views they want to espouse. My happy moment is they're involved.
Yeah, I mean, the one positive from this polarization and the politics becoming so entertaining in the last 5 or 6 years, students are active. Students are curious. And for our classes, with history and political science, all this, we can tell a difference. I mean, I taught students 10 years ago that they knew who the president was, maybe not the vice president. We've got students that know the Speaker of the House, and, so it's important to make the,
and what they
challenge
do,
these kids.
Not just the name, but things that they're actually doing and promoting. So yeah, I'll agree with you. I'll second and third that, since you guys are on that track. I'm really proud of the student engagement, the involvement, their interest in civic engagement, regardless of which side of that line that they're on. They want to see more young people being involved too, and so they're good advocates for the system. And isn't that patriotic?
It is.
So God bless America.
And God bless each and every one. We'll see you later.